How to overcome anxiety. Today with the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Anxiety doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides in the silence between breaths. It steals your sleep, makes your chest feel like it's collapsing inward, and fills your thoughts with invisible alarms you can't shut off. And the worst part? It convinces you that God has gone quiet. You know what I'm talking about? Those nights where you stare at the ceiling begging for peace, but feeling only emptiness. You've said prayers, read verses, tried calming techniques, even cried into the pillow until your voice disappeared. And still, the anxiety stays. But what if what you're feeling isn't just emotional? What if it's something deeper? A spiritual silence that's grown louder over time? A disconnect not from the world around you, but from the voice of the one who created you. Let's be honest. In the rush of this world, we've turned anxiety into a background noise. Something we carry like an extra weight in our soul. And yet, in Scripture, how often do we hear Jesus say, "Do not be afraid," over and over again? Not because he's commanding us to be strong, but because he knows we're afraid and wants us to hear his voice in the storm. That's the key. The voice. Anxiety grows strongest where God's voice is weakest. And not because God stopped speaking, but because we've stopped listening in the way he taught us to listen. That's why what you're about to hear is not just a message. It's a path back to his voice. Back to a place where even if the anxiety doesn't disappear overnight, the silence won't feel like abandonment anymore. We're going to talk about something forgotten by many, but remembered by the saints. Something given directly by Jesus to a young nun in Poland who battled fears most of us couldn't imagine. Her name was Faustina. Her prayer became a lifeline for millions. And her devotion, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, wasn't meant just for the dying. It was meant for the anxious, for the fearful, for you. This isn't about formulas or magic words. This is about rediscovering the shield God already gave us, a way to enter his presence, even when your heart is racing, your thoughts are drowning, and your faith feels cracked. You're going to hear things you've never heard before about the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Stories that aren't told in catechism classes. Mysteries that live between the beads. Scientific truth that aligns with spiritual grace. And a perspective on anxiety that goes beyond symptoms and diagnoses and into something eternal. The goal isn't to give you a perfect life without fear. The goal is to help you find the place where fear loses its grip, where mercy meets anxiety, and peace becomes possible again. Now take a deep breath, not to relax, but to open. Because what comes next isn't theory. It's a battle plan. And the first step is understanding the real nature of what you're up against. Let's begin. When anxiety becomes spiritual silence. Anxiety wears many faces. For some, it's a constant noise in the mind, like static that never fades. For others, it's a hollow stillness, a kind of silence that creeps in and doesn't leave. That's the kind of anxiety most people never talk about. The quiet kind. The one that doesn't come with racing thoughts or shaking hands, but with a sense of emptiness. Disconnection. You sit in prayer and feel nothing. You ask for peace and hear nothing. You search for God and find silence. That's when anxiety becomes more than psychological. It becomes spiritual. And that's where most people get lost. Because the world tells us anxiety is just about stress, brain chemistry, breathing exercises. But what do you do when none of those things work? When you've tried everything and still feel like your soul is drifting? When the silence is louder than the prayer? What if that kind of anxiety isn't just a reaction to your circumstances, but a sign that your spirit is starving? The truth is, we're not just minds and bodies, we're souls. And the soul doesn't get sick from stress alone. It gets sick when it loses contact with the voice of its creator. When it forgets what God sounds like. When it gets used to silence that was never meant to be there. And that's the danger. Anxiety grows where God's voice fades, not because he stops speaking, but because we've stopped listening in the way we were meant to. Sometimes we think God's silence means he's ignoring us, that maybe he's disappointed, or worse, absent. But in Scripture, the silence of God is never emptiness. It's invitation. When Jesus was in the garden, the silence from heaven didn't mean the Father was gone. It meant the Son had entered the deepest intimacy of trust. That's what we miss. Silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's the place where God wants to meet us in a deeper way. Not through noise or answers or feelings, but through presence, through stillness, through mercy. But the problem is, when anxiety hijacks that silence, we don't feel intimacy. We feel abandonment. And we pull away. That's how the cycle begins. You feel anxious, you pray, you hear nothing, so you pray less, you trust less. You start to believe the silence is permanent. You assume God has stepped back. And the more you believe that, the more anxious you become. Until it doesn't even feel like anxiety anymore. It just feels like who you are, like your new normal. But it's not. That's not who you are. And that's not what God wants for you. That's why the Divine Mercy Chaplet is so important. Because it doesn't demand emotion. It doesn't require clarity. It doesn't even ask you to feel close to God. It simply invites you to say the words, to step into the silence, and let the mercy of God echo louder than the fear in your mind. The chaplet is built for this kind of anxiety, for the kind that hides behind a calm face, for the kind that keeps you functional, but hollow, for the kind that no one sees. When you say, "Have mercy on us and on the whole world," you're not just saying a religious phrase. You're breaking the silence. You're speaking a divine language into the void. You're reminding your soul and the darkness around you that God's mercy is still here, still moving, still stronger than the anxiety trying to close in. This isn't about escaping your anxiety. It's about transforming it, letting it become the very place where God shows up, not in thunder or fire, but in the whisper between each word, the sacred rhythm of a soul crying out and receiving, even when it can't feel the answer. Because that's what mercy is. It's not a feeling. It's not an idea. It's a person, a presence, a promise that even in your silence, God has not let go. And when you finally realize that your anxiety doesn't scare him, that your numbness doesn't disqualify you, that your silence is not a wall but a door, then something shifts. The darkness doesn't vanish, but it loses its voice. The silence doesn't disappear, but it begins to speak. And what it says is this: you are not alone. You never were. The Divine Mercy Chaplet, as a forgotten shield. Most people think of the Divine Mercy Chaplet as something reserved for quiet times in church, a devotion for the very devout, or a prayer for the dying whispered at a hospital bed. They picture old women clutching rosaries, priests leading groups after Mass, or families reciting it at 3 o'clock. But very few understand what they are actually holding when they pray it. This chaplet is not a soft lullaby. It's not a filler between the rosary and a novena. It is a shield, a weapon, a gift given directly by Jesus to defend the soul from storms that no self-help book can calm. And like any weapon, if you leave it on the shelf, it won't protect you. When Saint Faustina recorded the words of Jesus, he didn't speak to her like a teacher giving an optional lesson. He spoke like a commander giving a code. He said, "Through the chaplet you will obtain everything if what you ask for is compatible with my will." He promised protection at the hour of death, but also protection in life, in temptation, in despair. He gave it at a time when the world was on the brink of war, chaos, and mass anxiety. This was no coincidence. The chaplet was heaven's answer to a humanity that was about to drown in fear and bloodshed. But over time, we turned it into a routine, a devotion tucked in pamphlets, rattled off without reflection. We forgot its origin story. We forgot that Jesus called it a last hope of salvation for the world. We forgot that he said even the most hardened sinner, if they prayed it once with trust, could receive unimaginable graces. That's why so many people today pray it but don't feel its power. They're using it like a lullaby instead of a shield. When you hold the chaplet, you are holding a map of mercy, but also a weapon forged in heaven. Each bead is a blow against despair. Each repetition is a fortress wall rising around your heart. And unlike human shields, this one does not block you from reality. It transforms reality around you. It doesn't deny pain, it sanctifies it. It doesn't silence fear, it reorients it. You're not just repeating a prayer. You're entering a spiritual technology that predates your anxiety and outlasts your fear. That's why calling it forgotten isn't just a dramatic phrase. It's true. Ask most Catholics today what the chaplet means, and they'll say it's about divine mercy at 3 o'clock. But ask them what it does, and you'll hear vague answers. They don't know it's a direct participation in Christ's intercession, a drawing down of grace, not just for the world, but for your own storm. They don't know that the words, "for the sake of his sorrowful passion," place their suffering inside his passion. They don't know that saying, "Have mercy on us and on the whole world," expands their anxiety into a cosmic prayer that moves heaven itself. And maybe you didn't know either. Maybe you thought you were just praying. But what you're actually doing when you take up the chaplet in your anxiety is strapping on armor. You're stepping into an ancient current of grace. You're entering a prayer that was designed for times like these, times of fear, chaos, and spiritual confusion. This is why the saints called devotions like these weapons. Because the battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not just against your thoughts or your nerves. It's against despair, against lies, against the voice that tells you God has left you. And when you pray the chaplet as a shield, you're not escaping the fight. You're standing in it with heaven at your back. Think about that for a moment. Every time you pray this chaplet with faith, you are not only asking for mercy, but wielding mercy. You're carrying it into your anxiety like a soldier carrying a light into a dark tunnel. And even if you can't see the difference right away, the darkness can. That's why you should never underestimate what's in your hands. This prayer has saved souls at the edge of hell. It can calm a heart at the edge of panic. So as you listen to this, don't think of the Divine Mercy Chaplet as a soft devotion. Think of it as a forgotten shield that has been waiting for you to pick it up. You don't need to feel holy. You don't need to feel calm. You don't even need to feel anything at all. You only need to pray it, to hold it like a lifeline, to let it do what Jesus said it would do. In a world drowning in noise, he gave us something silent but stronger than noise. In a life overwhelmed by anxiety, he gave us a prayer that cuts through anxiety, like light through shadow. And once you rediscover it as a shield, you'll never pray it the same way again. The neuroscience of mercy. What happens in the brain? Science and faith are not enemies. They are two lenses looking at the same mystery from different angles. Most people think of prayer as something purely spiritual, something that floats above the world of neurons and hormones. But the truth is, prayer changes the brain. It reshapes it. It rewires it. And the Divine Mercy Chaplet, in its rhythm and repetition, carries a design that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. When you are anxious, your brain is in survival mode. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear and threat detection, fires like an alarm. Your body releases cortisol and adrenaline, your heart races, your muscles tighten. This is not just emotion. It is a full-body reaction built to protect you from danger. The problem is, in modern life, the threat isn't a predator in the woods. It's your own mind, your worries, your fears. Your body is living in a state of constant false alarms. That's why your thoughts spin. That's why your chest feels heavy. That's why anxiety can feel like drowning. And that's why it's so hard to just think your way out of it. Now here is where mercy meets science. Repetition, especially slow and rhythmic repetition, signals to the nervous system that the threat is passing. It engages the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. This lowers heart rate, reduces stress hormones, and quiets the amygdala. In other words, it calms the alarm. That's exactly what the Divine Mercy Chaplet does. It isn't random words. It is a sequence of phrases, repeated in a cadence that mirrors the breathing patterns used in trauma therapy, mindfulness, and bilateral stimulation exercises designed to rewire the brain after anxiety or PTSD. Think about the prayer. For the sake of His sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. 10 times, slowly, on each bead. As you say it, your breath lengthens, your mind focuses, your hands move the beads in rhythm with your words. You're creating a physical anchor for your mind. You're telling your nervous system you're safe. But more than that, you're also telling your soul you're not alone. Science calls it entrainment. Faith calls it grace. And there's something else happening. Modern research in neuroplasticity shows that repeated spiritual practices don't just calm the brain temporarily. They build new pathways. They strengthen networks associated with empathy, compassion, and trust. They weaken networks associated with fear and self-centered rumination. When you pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet regularly, you are literally training your brain to choose mercy over fear, trust over panic, surrender over control. You're rewiring your response to anxiety from the inside out. This is not an accident. When Jesus gave this prayer to Saint Faustina, He gave her something that worked at every level: spiritual, emotional, physical. He gave her a devotion that would survive centuries of chaos, world wars, and now our age of anxiety. It's not magic. It's design. A divine design that meets human biology where it is most vulnerable. People sometimes say, "But I prayed and didn't feel anything." That's because prayer isn't always about instant sensation. It's about gradual transformation. Just like exercise strengthens muscles over time, prayer strengthens neural pathways of peace over time. Every bead you move, every phrase you repeat, is like a rep in the gym for your soul and your brain. You may not notice it at first, but it is happening. You are becoming a person who can face anxiety with a different nervous system, a different inner script, a different strength. So when you pick up the chaplet, don't just see beads. See a lifeline that reaches from heaven into your biology. See a rhythm that slows the storms inside you. See a practice that is teaching your brain and your soul to breathe together again. The world may call it superstition. Science may call it patterned prayer. But you will call it what it truly is. Mercy reaching into your deepest wiring, reshaping your fear from the inside out. And that is why the Divine Mercy Chaplet is not only a forgotten shield. It is a living therapy of heaven, designed to heal the modern mind before the modern mind even existed. A cry from the depths, the power of "Have mercy on us." The words, "Have mercy on us and on the whole world," are deceptively simple. People often say them quickly, almost automatically, without realizing the depth that each repetition carries. But these words are not just a line from a prayer. They are a cry from the depths of the human heart, a cry that resonates in the spiritual realm and in the very fibers of your being. When you say them, you are not just speaking to God. You are opening a channel between heaven and earth, a channel that fear cannot block, doubt cannot sever, and anxiety cannot overpower. Think about it. When you are anxious, your mind screams, thoughts race, images replay, worst-case scenarios dominate your imagination. You feel trapped in a cycle that seems endless, as if your soul is pleading in silence and no one is listening. But here, with this simple phrase, you are giving voice to your inner desperation. You are translating your anxiety into words that carry authority and surrender at the same time. Authority, because you are calling on the infinite power of God's mercy. Surrender, because you are handing over the weight of your fears, your doubts, your internal chaos, and even the unknown suffering of the world. This prayer is unlike any other because it addresses both the personal and the cosmic. You are not only asking mercy for yourself, but extending it outward, encompassing every soul on the planet. That simultaneous inward and outward reach shifts your perspective. Suddenly, your fear is not the center of the universe. Your panic is not the final measure of reality. You realize that your own suffering is connected to a larger story, a divine narrative in which mercy is the thread that binds all things together. In that moment, anxiety loses its absolute power, because it is no longer self-contained. It is transformed into a conduit for grace. There is a profound spiritual science behind this. Repetition focuses the mind, channels attention, and interrupts obsessive thought cycles. But in the spiritual dimension, repetition invites God's presence. When you say, "Have mercy on us," on each bead, you are embedding mercy into every moment, every thought, every heartbeat. You are drawing heaven into your nervous system and into the corners of your mind where fear hides. Each repetition acts like a wave washing over anxiety, eroding its grip, dissolving its illusions, and reminding your soul that mercy is stronger than every dark thought. And this is not theory. Look at the lives of saints who prayed the chaplet in desperation. Saint Faustina herself, alone in her cell, whispered these words in the dead of night when her spirit was tormented, when doubt clawed at her faith, when despair threatened to suffocate her. And she discovered that every time she prayed this cry, she was anchored in something eternal. The fear would not vanish instantly, but the weight of it changed. It became a vessel for God's grace, a space where peace could seep in even before the mind understood it. The brilliance of this phrase lies in its duality. It is human and divine at the same time. Human because it expresses vulnerability, a plea for help, a raw acknowledgement that we cannot do this alone. Divine because it calls upon the infinite mercy of God, whose power is unlimited and whose attention is unceasing. And when you pray it consistently, you are entering a rhythm where human limitation meets divine omnipotence. Fear may try to persist, but it cannot withstand the cadence of mercy that flows through every bead, every breath, every whisper. So when anxiety presses against your chest, when thoughts loop endlessly, when nothing else seems to calm the storm, take up the chaplet. Speak these words with intention. Speak them as a cry from your deepest need. Speak them as a declaration that God's mercy is bigger than your fear. And notice how something subtle but undeniable begins to happen. The silence in your soul is filled, the darkness around you feels less suffocating, and your heart begins to understand what your mind could not yet grasp. That mercy is real, that it is present, and that it has arrived at your side, carrying your anxiety, transforming it, and setting the stage for peace that surpasses understanding. Saint Faustina's Midnight Encounters. Saint Faustina's life was not quiet or simple. Most people imagine saints as serene figures, always composed, praying in peaceful monasteries, untouched by fear or inner turmoil. That was not her experience. Her diary reveals a reality that is raw, unsettling, and profoundly human. There were nights when anxiety and fear pressed in on her so heavily that sleep became impossible. She writes about moments when she felt darkness surround her, as if invisible forces were probing her soul, testing her trust, and seeking to drown her spirit in despair. In these moments, she did not turn to theory or mere reflection or empty words. She turned to the Divine Mercy Chaplet. These were the midnight encounters where her life became a laboratory for mercy. She describes the weight of restlessness, the trembling of her heart, the sensation of a spiritual battle taking place in silence. It is here, in these crucibles of fear, that the chaplet was not optional. It was necessary. She began the prayer almost instinctively, clutching the beads in her hands like a lifeline, murmuring the words into the dark, repeating, "Have mercy on us and on the whole world," as though each repetition were a shield against forces she could not see. And in that repetition, in that rhythm, she experienced something extraordinary. The presence of God in a way that filled the room, yet was invisible. It was a peace that could not be explained by human reasoning, a calm that did not remove the night, but transformed it. What makes these encounters remarkable is not that she was safe, but that she was effective. Saint Faustina writes of resisting temptations and fears that seemed insurmountable, of seeing anxiety and despair retreat simply because she had engaged the chaplet with trust. This is not metaphorical. In her diary, she testifies that evil trembled at the words, that her soul became fortified, and that divine mercy entered the spaces where doubt had nested for years. The chaplet became her anchor in the spiritual warfare she could not avoid, in the anxiety that otherwise would have overwhelmed her human heart. And there is a lesson here for us. Many of us believe that spiritual power comes from feeling, from clarity, from emotional certainty. But Saint Faustina's midnight encounters prove otherwise. Power comes from obedience and trust. Power comes from speaking mercy even when you are alone, even when fear is thick, even when the silence is deafening. The chaplet is not an ornament for moments of peace. It is a weapon for moments of trial. Its repetition, its structure, its alignment with the passion of Christ creates a channel of grace that cannot be disrupted by fear, despair, or anxiety. Think about your own nights, the ones where you lie awake and your thoughts loop endlessly, the ones where you ask for relief and find nothing but silence. That is exactly the moment where this prayer meets you. It meets the human experience at the point of vulnerability. Just as Saint Faustina held the beads tightly in the dark, whispering each word against the pressing weight of anxiety, you too can hold this shield. You can allow each repetition to serve as a sword, each decade as armor, and each breath as a signal to your soul that mercy is present, even when nothing else is. These midnight encounters were not small or insignificant. They were battles, trials, and victories condensed into prayer. And they were practical. Saint Faustina did not experience mystical peace because she ignored the darkness. She experienced it because she engaged it with the Divine Mercy Chaplet. The words themselves became an active force against fear. The rhythm of the prayer regulated her heart, focused her mind, and drew her soul out of the paralysis of anxiety. And even when terror pressed close, even when shadows seemed to linger longer than the night, the chaplet delivered her into mercy, into strength, and into trust. So when you face your own midnight anxiety, when fear is quiet but deadly, remember Saint Faustina. Her experience proves that prayer is not about comfort alone. It is about confrontation, about persistence, about faith that the words you repeat carry power, even when your emotions do not. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is more than devotion. It is a lifeline for the soul in the deep hours of trial, a light in the invisible battle, and a shield you can carry into your own night, turning darkness into a space where mercy and peace can descend. The invisible exchange, what you give and what you receive. When we pray, we often think of it as asking, pleading, or begging. We focus on what we hope to receive, what we need, what we fear we lack. But the Divine Mercy Chaplet reveals something deeper, something often overlooked. Prayer is not one-sided. It is an exchange, a sacred, invisible exchange between your heart and God's mercy. What you offer, even your fear, even your trembling, is not wasted. And what you receive, even if you do not notice it immediately, transforms you in ways your mind cannot measure. Think about this. When anxiety presses against you, your natural instinct is to fight, resist, or escape. You tense, you plan, you try to control. But the chaplet asks you to do something radically different. It asks you to place your fear into God's hands repeatedly. Each bead is a unit of surrender. Each repetition is a deliberate act of offering your anxiety. And in exchange, mercy flows into your spirit. It does not always feel dramatic at first. It does not always bring immediate relief. But this exchange begins reshaping your inner landscape. Your heart begins to breathe differently. Your thoughts begin to settle in ways subtle but undeniable. Your soul begins to sense that it is not alone. This is why the practice of the chaplet is so profound. You are giving your fear, your doubt, your tension, your restless nights, and your spiraling thoughts to Christ. And He is giving you peace, trust, courage, and the presence of His mercy. The moment you grasp this, even a little, it changes the way you pray. You are no longer simply asking for help. You are participating in a divine rhythm where the act of surrender is itself a channel of grace. The more authentic your offering, the more potent the reception of mercy. Fear and peace coexist for a moment. But the balance tips toward peace, because God's mercy is infinitely stronger than your anxiety. The invisible exchange works at multiple levels. Spiritually, you are aligning your will with God's, acknowledging that you cannot control everything and inviting Him to act on your behalf. Emotionally, you are transferring the weight of your fear into a space where it can be held safely, where it can be transformed rather than amplified. Psychologically, the repetition, focus, and rhythm of the prayer act as anchors, helping your mind break free from obsessive loops, allowing clarity and calm to emerge. Physically, even subtle changes in breathing and muscle tension occur when you move through the chaplet with intention, reflecting a holistic transformation that touches every aspect of your being. This exchange is also profoundly relational. When you pray the chaplet for the world, for others, for those you cannot help personally, you are not just asking for mercy on them. You are expanding your own heart, training your spirit to move beyond self-centered fear and into compassion, empathy, and shared trust. The act of giving your concern outward mirrors the mercy you receive inward. Anxiety begins to lose its grip, not because it disappears, but because you are participating in something larger than yourself, a divine current of mercy that flows in both directions. And there is a mystery here. The mercy you receive is not always visible or immediate. Sometimes it comes as subtle relief, a calm thought, a sense of courage, or a gentle nudging toward hope. Sometimes it is more profound, transforming your perspective on suffering, fear, and trust in ways that will only reveal themselves over time. The point is not instant gratification, the point is active participation in the exchange. You give, you receive. You are changed. And in that change, the hold of anxiety loosens. So the next time you take up the chaplet in a moment of fear, remember, you are entering into a sacred contract of mercy. Your anxiety, your worry, your tension are not obstacles. They are the currency you use to engage with divine grace. And what you receive in return is far beyond the mind's capacity to calculate. Each bead becomes a step in a dance between surrender and blessing, fear and trust, human limitation and divine power. And if you remain faithful in this exchange, you will discover that your anxiety is no longer a prison, but a doorway to peace, a space where mercy flows, and a place where your soul is transformed one bead at a time. How demons respond to the Divine Mercy Chaplet. There is a spiritual dimension to anxiety that most people never consider. We see the racing thoughts, the tension in our chest, the fear that grips our hearts, and we assume it is all human. But anxiety has a deeper component, one that touches the unseen world. The Bible reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. When the soul is anxious, vulnerable, and distracted, spiritual forces can amplify fear and despair. They thrive on isolation, doubt, and silence. They want your mind to spiral, your heart to tighten, your trust to fracture. But the Divine Mercy Chaplet intervenes in this battle in ways that are profound, mystical, and powerful. Saint Faustina's writings reveal that demons flee in the presence of mercy. The chaplet is not only a prayer of surrender, it is a declaration that mercy reigns. Every repetition of, "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," is like a clarion call in the spiritual realm. The darkness recoils because mercy is stronger than fear, stronger than temptation, stronger than anxiety itself. When you pray the chaplet intentionally, when you engage your heart and voice, you are not just speaking words, you are asserting authority over forces that seek to torment your soul. The rhythm, the cadence, the focus on Christ's passion sends a message that mercy, not fear, is in control. Imagine anxiety as both a human and spiritual affliction. Your mind races, your heart pounds, but there is more. The unseen realm is reacting to your vulnerability. Demons, while invisible, cannot withstand the repetition of mercy invoked with faith. It is not superstition, it is spiritual law. Mercy is an offensive and defensive force. It shields your soul from attacks. It disarms the enemy. It creates a sanctuary of divine power in the invisible spaces around you. And the chaplet is the channel. Each bead is a barrier, each decade a line of defense, each word a sword of light piercing the darkness. When we consider the unseen reaction, it is important to understand that this is not about fear-mongering or dramatization. It is about recognizing reality. Spiritual warfare is often silent, subtle, and persistent. The enemy works in whispers, in thoughts that loop endlessly, in shadows that weigh on your soul. And yet, the chaplet has a unique capacity to counter this. It aligns your heart with Christ's mercy. It reinforces your will with divine authority. It creates a presence so strong that darkness cannot stand. In a sense, demons respond because mercy exposes lies, because it reveals truth, because it brings light to areas they wish to keep in shadow. This is why regular practice matters. The more you pray the chaplet with sincerity, the more these unseen forces are confronted with a reality they cannot dominate. Your fear remains humanly present, but it no longer has the final say. You are participating in a spiritual reality that is ancient, eternal, and powerful. And you are not alone in this. Saints, mystics, and even ordinary believers have experienced a relief that goes beyond the natural. Moments when fear lifted inexplicably, when calm replaced panic, when courage emerged in impossible situations. This is not coincidence. This is mercy acting invisibly in ways the mind can feel but the eyes cannot see. Every repetition of the chaplet is a tiny but profound exorcism, not of people necessarily, but of anxiety, despair, and spiritual oppression. The repetition of mercy unravels the lies of fear, disarms the strategies of darkness, and creates a space where divine presence is tangible. You may feel subtle warmth, a soft sense of peace, or even a shift in perception. That is the reaction, the invisible response of forces that cannot withstand God's mercy. And this is why the chaplet is so essential for those wrestling with persistent fear. It is not only a prayer of the heart, but a declaration of spiritual authority, a protective shield, and a call to divine intervention that resonates in both seen and unseen realms. So, the next time anxiety strikes, remember that you are not just dealing with a human struggle. You are entering a larger battlefield. And when you take up the Divine Mercy Chaplet, you do not fight alone. You summon mercy, you assert authority, and you engage a power that terrifies the darkness. Your fear is human, but your prayer is divine. The enemy may linger, but mercy does not waver. And in this invisible exchange, you are shielded, strengthened, and transformed. That is the profound power hidden in the chaplet that most people never see, but every soul willing to trust can experience. Anxiety, guilt, and the false image of God. Many people who struggle with anxiety carry a hidden burden beyond fear itself. Guilt. They believe that their anxiety is a sign of weakness, a reflection of spiritual failure, or evidence that God is disappointed in them. They feel they are failing to pray correctly, failing to trust fully, failing to measure up to what they imagine God expects. This false image of God, that He is angry, distant, or critical, creates a spiritual tension that amplifies every anxious thought. It turns normal fear into a heavy weight that presses on the soul. And the more we accept this false perception, the more our hearts contract under the pressure of worry. The Divine Mercy Chaplet addresses this directly, though subtly. Every repetition of, "For the sake of His sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," reminds the anxious soul that God is not a distant judge, but a merciful Father. The words are not empty promises. They carry divine authority and a truth that heals the misunderstanding at the root of fear. When you pray this chaplet, you are practicing a spiritual correction. You are reshaping your perception of God from one of judgment to one of mercy, from fear to trust, from isolation to intimacy. The more you immerse yourself in the rhythm of this prayer, the more your heart begins to internalize that God's gaze is not critical, but compassionate. Guilt often masquerades as anxiety. It whispers, "You should have done better. You are responsible for the outcomes you cannot control. God must be displeased." This false message paralyzes the soul and intensifies inner turmoil. The chaplet dismantles this by shifting focus outward, toward mercy for others, and upward, toward the infinite compassion of God. Each bead, each decade, is a reminder that mercy is bigger than your mistakes, bigger than your fears, and bigger than your misunderstanding of God's nature. Your anxiety does not define you, and neither does your guilt. The prayer reorients your mind and heart to the truth that God's mercy is the foundation of your existence and the source of your freedom from fear. The psychological dimension aligns with the spiritual. Repetition, rhythm, and focus create neural patterns that reduce obsessive thoughts about guilt and failure. This is not coincidental. The structure of the chaplet, designed by Christ himself, harmonizes spiritual law with human psychology. It allows the anxious mind to redirect attention from self-condemnation toward trust and surrender. Your thoughts begin to slow. Your heart begins to relax. Your spirit senses that the God who suffers with you is not the God who punishes you. Anxiety remains, but it no longer dominates. Guilt remains, but it no longer blinds. You are anchored in a truth that fear cannot erase. God's mercy is absolute, and you are a recipient. Even when you cannot feel it, even when doubts arise, the chaplet continues to act. Like a gentle current beneath a stormy sea, it reshapes the contours of your inner world. You are learning to perceive God as He truly is, loving, forgiving, patient, and attentive. You are training your soul to respond to anxiety not with self-criticism, but with trust. And in this reframing, anxiety loses its power as a reflection of supposed inadequacy. It becomes instead a signal to reach for mercy, to engage in the invisible exchange, and to place yourself in the hands of one who does not abandon. This topic is critical because it addresses a silent multiplier of anxiety, the lie that God is displeased with us. Most people never see this. They pray, read scripture, or attend Mass, yet they cannot release the tension in their hearts. The chaplet targets the lie at its root. It teaches the soul that fear and guilt are not signs of failure. They are invitations to encounter mercy. And when mercy is embraced consistently, it creates a new internal landscape. Anxiety remains human, but fear of God is replaced by reverence, respect, and deep trust. Guilt remains human, but it no longer overshadows the soul. Your perception of God becomes aligned with truth, a God who loves, heals, and redeems even the most anxious heart. So when you feel trapped in the cycle of anxiety and guilt, remember that the Divine Mercy Chaplet is not only a prayer for the world, it is a mirror for your soul. It reveals God as He truly is, strips away false assumptions, and restores your spirit. Anxiety may still press in, but it cannot dictate your understanding of God's mercy. Each word, each bead, each breath is an act of realignment, turning fear into faith, doubt into trust, and guilt into an open heart, ready to receive the mercy that transforms. This is the profound power hidden in the chaplet, waiting for those willing to see God as He truly is. Praying when you feel nothing. One of the most difficult moments in prayer is when you feel nothing. When the words pass your lips or your mind recites them mechanically, but your heart is numb. No warmth, no reassurance, no sense of God's presence. This is what many call a spiritual desert, a time when the soul feels abandoned, and the mind whispers that prayer is pointless. For those struggling with anxiety, These moments are even more terrifying. You're already trapped in fear, and now it seems like God's mercy is invisible, silent, absent. But this is precisely the moment when prayer is most powerful. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is uniquely suited for this. It does not rely on emotional response. It does not require that you feel connected, inspired, or moved. The power of the chaplet is not in sensation, but in obedience, repetition, and trust. Every bead you touch, every word you utter, is a signal of surrender. You are choosing mercy even when your emotions scream that it doesn't exist. You are placing your anxiety in God's hands even when your heart doubts. You are stepping into the spiritual rhythm that bypasses human perception and moves directly into grace. Feeling nothing can be misleading. You might think your prayer is ineffective, but God does not measure by sensation. He measures by faith and intention. When you pray the chaplet in emotional numbness, you are participating in a profound mystery, the unseen work of mercy. Your words act as vessels, carrying grace into places your mind cannot access. Your persistence creates a channel where anxiety is gradually reshaped, fear is gradually released, and your soul begins to recalibrate toward trust. Silence, emptiness, and numbness are not barriers. They are the very soil in which mercy grows most quietly, but most deeply. Saint Faustina experienced this repeatedly. She wrote of nights when fear pressed upon her like a physical weight, when temptation whispered lies, when the presence of God seemed absent. And yet, she prayed. She moved the beads, she spoke the words. She continued without sensation, without reassurance, without feeling the immediate comfort that most people assume is necessary for prayer. And over time, she witnessed transformation. Anxiety did not vanish instantly, but her soul changed. Strength appeared where there had been despair. Trust emerged where doubt had dominated. Peace began to seep into the cracks, even when she could not consciously feel it. This is the hidden principle of praying when you feel nothing. Consistency and trust are more powerful than emotion. This practice also trains the mind to disengage from the obsession with feeling. Anxiety often loops endlessly because it searches for confirmation, reassurance, or evidence that everything will be okay. When you pray the chaplet without feeling, you are teaching your mind that your relationship with God is not dependent on temporary emotional responses. Mercy is real, even if your mind cannot sense it. Trust is possible, even when the heart feels empty. And over time, this repeated act of faithful obedience rewires the nervous system, creating a foundation of resilience that persists beyond temporary emotional fluctuations. The spiritual principle is clear. God works invisibly. Faith does not require sensation, it requires action. The Divine Mercy Chaplet allows the anxious soul to act faithfully even in the absence of feeling. It converts mechanical repetition into an avenue for grace. The very act of praying when you feel nothing becomes a powerful statement. I trust you even when I cannot sense you. I surrender even when my heart is silent. I choose mercy even when fear dominates. And in that choice, mercy begins to infiltrate every layer of the soul, gradually loosening anxiety's grip. So when you face the moments of numbness, do not despair. Those are precisely the moments when your prayer matters most. The Divine Mercy Chaplet carries you through the invisible battle, bridging the gap between emptiness and grace. Every word, every bead, every repetition builds a spiritual current that flows beyond perception, touching the mind, the heart, and the soul. Feeling nothing is not failure. It is an invitation to deeper trust, to surrender. and to the silent work of mercy that will eventually manifest in peace. Even when your heart cannot recognize it, God is present, God is working, and your soul is being transformed one bead at a time. The breath between beads. When you pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, most people focus only on the words or the beads, rarely noticing the spaces between. Yet it is in the pause, the breath, the brief silence between each bead, that something extraordinary happens. That fraction of time is where the body, mind, and spirit synchronize. It is where anxiety begins to dissolve, where fear is met with intention, and where mercy quietly flows. Most forms of stress and panic hold the breath unconsciously. The chest tightens, the heart races, the mind loops in spirals of worry. By introducing intentional breathing into the rhythm of the chaplet, you are engaging the nervous system, the muscles, and the mind in a coordinated act of surrender. Each breath becomes a sacred marker, a moment to consciously hand over fear and tension to God. Inhale slowly. Imagine drawing in divine mercy. Exhale completely. Release anxiety, guilt, and doubt. This is not a mere relaxation technique, it is spiritual practice. Your breath, your heart, your mind, and your soul begin to participate in a pattern that mirrors the mercy of Christ. The pause between beads transforms prayer from recitation into a living encounter. Anxiety can no longer dominate because the body and spirit are engaged together in a rhythm of trust. This creates a feedback loop where physical calm reinforces spiritual surrender, and spiritual surrender reinforces emotional release. The chaplet's structure supports this naturally. Each decade, each invocation of, "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," provides a natural interval to breathe, to focus, to reflect. But it is up to the practitioner to notice, to make the pause intentional. When done with awareness, the effect is profound. It slows the heart, reduces stress hormones, quiets the racing thoughts, and allows the nervous system to reset. In other words, the simple act of conscious breathing between beads converts prayer into an embodied meditation, engaging every level of human experience, physical, mental, and spiritual. The mercy of God is not only prayed for, it is physically integrated into the body and mind. This practice also reinforces focus. Anxiety thrives on distraction. Worries loop endlessly because the mind is not anchored in the present moment. The breath between beads is that anchor. As you inhale and exhale, you are present. You are fully engaged in the prayer. Your hands on the beads, your lips speaking words of mercy, and your breath flowing in rhythm create a harmony that anxiety cannot penetrate. Over time, this becomes a habit, training the mind to return to God's mercy even outside of formal prayer. The rhythm becomes internalized, a spiritual compass pointing toward trust and calm whenever fear arises. Spiritually, the breath is symbolic as well as functional. In Scripture, God often breathes life into creation, speaks words that carry power, and fills hearts with spirit. By connecting your breath to prayer, you are participating in that divine rhythm. Each inhalation invites God's mercy into your soul. Each exhalation releases what does not belong: fear, guilt, tension, and worry. It is a physical and spiritual alignment, a movement that synchronizes your human limitations with divine grace. Anxiety may still press at first, but gradually, as the rhythm settles, it becomes less oppressive, less controlling, and less defining of your inner life. Consider this: the space between beads is as important as the words themselves. It is the liminal space where transformation occurs. Many pray mechanically and never notice it. But when you engage fully with the pause, the breath, the rhythm, you are no longer merely reciting. You are inhabiting mercy. You are participating in a dynamic exchange where fear is handed over, trust is received, and God's presence becomes tangible. This is why the chaplet is so uniquely powerful. Its impact is not only verbal or cognitive, it is kinetic, embodied, and alive. It moves through the heart, settles in the mind, and transforms the nervous system, allowing mercy to permeate your entire being. The breath between beads becomes a bridge between anxiety and peace, fear and surrender, the human and the divine. And every time you return to it, the transformation deepens. A secret you can carry into the night. Nighttime can be the hardest battlefield for the anxious soul. When the world quiets, the mind grows louder. Thoughts loop endlessly. Fears, regrets, and worries press in as if the darkness itself is conspiring against your peace. Sleep feels impossible. Even the quietest room seems heavy with tension. This is the hour when many people feel abandoned, when anxiety becomes relentless, when the silence of the world amplifies the noise within. But this is precisely when the Divine Mercy Chaplet becomes more than a prayer. It becomes a secret weapon, a portable sanctuary, a source of protection you can carry with you into the dark. The chaplet has a unique capacity to transform these moments. Unlike other prayers that rely on focus or emotion, it provides structure, rhythm, and repetition that the mind can grasp even when it is exhausted. Each bead, each decade, each phrase is a physical and spiritual anchor. You can hold it in your hand, feel the movement of the beads, and let the rhythm carry your heart and mind out of the loops of fear. The words themselves become a shield, the repetition becomes armor, and the act of praying becomes an active form of defense against the darkness, both external and internal. What makes this practice extraordinary at night is the convergence of physical stillness and spiritual awareness. When the world sleeps, your attention is less distracted. Your nervous system, which has been overstimulated during the day, is more receptive to the calming rhythm of the chaplet. The repetition of mercy slows the heart, eases tension, and begins to reset the body's stress responses. Psychologically, this helps break the cycles of obsessive worry that intensify in the quiet hours. Spiritually, it opens a channel for grace that is not dependent on emotion or immediate perception. Even when your mind feels like it is spinning, the chaplet continues to work invisibly, weaving peace into your nervous system, your thoughts, and your soul. This is why the chaplet is a secret you can carry. You do not need a church, a group, or even a conscious sense of God's presence. All you need is the prayer, the beads, and your willingness to speak mercy aloud or silently. The words extend beyond your lips into the spiritual realm, creating a protective atmosphere around your heart and mind. Anxiety may still attempt to intrude, but the chaplet creates an invisible barrier. Fear loses its authority. The darkness cannot claim dominion over a soul actively invoking divine mercy. There is also a symbolic truth here. Night often represents fear, the unknown, and the trials we cannot control. By praying the chaplet at night, you are physically and spiritually declaring that mercy will accompany you even in darkness. You are carrying a tangible reminder that God's presence is not confined to daylight or external circumstances. You are internalizing a truth that fear cannot erase, that you are never alone, that mercy is constant, and that your soul can find rest even amid the quietest storms. For those who struggle with insomnia, racing thoughts, or nocturnal panic, this practice is transformative. It allows you to redirect attention from anxiety to surrender, from fear to trust, from mental chaos to spiritual alignment. Each bead is a micro-practice of letting go, each decade a deeper immersion into God's mercy. Over time, this builds resilience. The night becomes less threatening, not because circumstances change, but because your soul carries the presence of God into it. The chaplet becomes a sanctuary you can hold in your hands, a refuge you can inhabit anywhere, and a constant source of reassurance that the divine is with you. The secret of the night is not about finding comfort outside yourself, but about discovering the capacity within your own soul to align with mercy. The chaplet trains your mind and heart to operate in tandem, to meet fear with faith, to replace worry with presence. It is a portable grace that transforms nocturnal anxiety into an opportunity for intimate encounter with God. And once this rhythm becomes internalized, the night ceases to be a source of dread and becomes a space where mercy, peace, and trust can descend quietly, persistently, and powerfully. The secret is simple, but its effects are profound. Mercy travels with you into the night, and the darkness no longer holds dominion over your soul. Your mercy will be your victory. Victory over anxiety is not a matter of eliminating fear completely. It is not a promise that you will never feel panic, doubt, or despair again. True victory is far deeper. It is the transformation of your heart, the realignment of your soul, and the surrender of your will to the mercy of God. The Divine Mercy Chaplet does not simply calm the storm temporarily. It teaches you how to walk through it with trust. It shows that the greatest power is not in controlling your circumstances, but in letting mercy control you. When you embrace this, every repetition of the prayer, every bead, every whispered plea, becomes a step toward freedom. Victory begins the moment you stop fighting in your own strength and start trusting in His. There is a spiritual principle here that cannot be overstated. Mercy transforms the human heart from the inside out. The anxieties that once held dominion over your mind, the fears that twisted your perception of reality, the guilt that chained your spirit, all of these are neutralized not by denial, not by willpower, not by distraction, but by mercy. And it is not only the mercy you receive that matters. It is also the mercy you become. When your soul opens to God's compassion repeatedly, consistently, and intentionally, your heart begins to reflect that mercy outward. Fear diminishes not because the world changes, but because the vessel carrying the fear changes. You become a person whose interior life is no longer captive to anxiety. You become a soul trained in trust, grounded in surrender, and fortified by divine grace. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is more than a prayer. It is a transformation. Each bead is a doorway. Each decade is a passage into the reality that mercy is stronger than fear, that trust is more powerful than panic, and that God's presence is inexhaustible. By entering into this rhythm, you align yourself with the same mercy that flowed through the passion of Christ. You begin to understand that your suffering is not meaningless, your fear is not unmanageable, and your anxiety is not invincible. The repetition, the focus, the surrender, it all builds a sanctuary within your own soul, a spiritual fortress where victory is realized not externally, but internally. And this victory is contagious. As your heart begins to carry mercy, it touches others in ways you may not immediately recognize. Your calm in moments of stress, your patience in moments of frustration, your trust in moments of uncertainty, they all become instruments of grace. By praying the chaplet, you are not only transforming yourself, you are bringing mercy into the world. Anxiety loses its grip, not only on you, but indirectly on those who encounter your steadiness, your peace, and your trust. What you receive and what you become are inseparable. Your mercy will be your victory because it transforms both your inner life and the lives around you. Remember that the chaplet is always accessible, always effective, and always active. It does not require perfection in feeling, in timing, or in understanding. It requires only willingness, a willingness to place fear in God's hands, to repeat the words, to surrender again and again. And in that surrender, victory is realized. It is quiet, it is profound, it is unstoppable. Anxiety may still visit, challenges may still arise, and fear may still knock at the door. But mercy stands between you and them. Mercy does not fight for you in your strength. It fights with you in God's strength. And that is the true triumph. That is the victory that lasts. That is the transformation that no storm, no night, no darkness can erase. When you pick up the chaplet tomorrow, or the next day, or in the quiet of the night, know this: you are not repeating words. You are engaging in a divine rhythm that reshapes fear into trust, chaos into peace, and surrender into victory. Your mercy, nurtured by the chaplet, will be your shield, your anchor, and your triumph. You are not only praying, you are being transformed. You are not only seeking comfort, you are stepping into victory. And that victory is eternal, because it is rooted in God's mercy, flowing through you, and reflected in the world around you.